Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this final designer panel session for the Fasten Off Yarnalong 2022. I almost said 2002 and caught myself in time. My name is Anne Blaney, also known as Annie B. Knits. I'm one of the designers for the event, but I'm also one of the volunteers for the event, and I am thrilled to be your host, moderator, whatever you want to call it for this. So I'm going to launch right in with our designers and ask you to introduce yourselves. I've just gathered your names and your websites, and I'm putting them all in the chat now. And I think what we'll do is we'll just go around in that order for all of the questions, if that makes sense for everybody. Which, Lori, I think that puts you first. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Lori Harrison. I'm the designer behind Eklori Designs. It's Tunisian crochet, mostly shawls and small accessories, but I've also recently started getting into garments.
Awesome. And where are you based?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona, so also not really a lot of need for heavy sweaters. So.
Fantastic. Beth, how about you?
Hi, I'm Beth Henderson, the designer behind Fig and Filament. I'm based in Cleveland, Ohio. And I am in the middle of focusing myself in onto crochet patterns that emphasize play and imagination and sharing craft with your kiddos, because mine otherwise help the same way as pets.
That's awesome. I love it. And Deb.
Hi, I'm Deb Milstein. My design brand is Late Night Knits. I named it Late Night Knits because as a new mom, late at night was the only time I had to myself for creativity. And as soon as the kid was asleep, that's where you would find me. I write patterns I write my own lace patterns. I use the technique called encoded lace, where I start with the word and then I write a pattern around that word. And I live in New Jersey, right outside New York City.
Awesome. And Jessica, over to you.
Yes, hello. Thanks so much for having us. I am Jessica, the designer behind Snickerdoodle Knits. I design knitting patterns that tell the stories of living. So they're relatable stories that are enjoyable to knit, easy to style and to wear. But then I also am the facilitator, podcaster, and business coach behind Pattern Design Circle. And I'm here in North Carolina.
All right. I should say I am up in Canada. I'm just outside of Toronto. So we're very slightly international, but I also see that we have at least one person joining us today in the audience from Europe, which is great too. So the next question, and I should say that we put out to our Fasten Off Yarnalong participants, we put out to that audience, what do you want to ask the designers in these panels? So the next question is, how did you get started on designing? And so we'll go around in that same circle. Lori, how about you?
So I had been crocheting since I was a little kid, and I got sick with mono about 6 or 7 years ago, and I couldn't do anything. So I went to my local yarn store and I was getting some yarn, and they showed a sample to another customer that was Tunisian crochet. I'd never seen it before. I thought it was fascinating. I went home with hooks, and over the next couple of months, while I was not doing much, I learned everything I could about Tunisian crochet, and I found that there wasn't actually all that many patterns out there, and a lot of the stuff I wanted to make didn't exist, like fun fancy shawls and stuff like that. So that's how I started designing, is like there was a huge there wasn't a lot of patterns, so I wanted more, and I wanted to get outreach out so that other people could discover this fun, different technique that I don't think had gotten a lot of exposure up until that point.
That's awesome. Beth, how about you?
I, like Lori, learned to crochet when I was little. It was actually a blanket with my mom where every other row was single crochet, and I was allowed to do those, and she did the fun ripple rows with taller stitches. Let it fall by the wayside for years, and then in college I was in architecture school. We had an annual fashion show that was a fundraiser for Dress for Success, and a friend and I got this awesome idea to crochet an entire outfit out of plarn. I had to relearn how to crochet. There was no pattern that worked for plarn for a dress. I will try to dig up that photo though, because it ended up being really cool. And
So plarn, just in case anybody isn't sure what that means,
Oh.
do you want to give the definition?
It's old plastic bags that have been turned into yarn. You cut loops and string them all together. We used like 1,400 plastic bags because that was just what it took to make enough plarn. And then I just kind of didn't stop making things. And I was like, I would take this part of this pattern and this part of that pattern. And I know that that is not a pattern you can really publish. But then there started being parts that I couldn't find a pattern for. And I would write or imagine what I needed and kind of chart it out and then later write it. I'm also an architect by trade, and writing instructions is something that I've spent 6 years learning how to do. So it kind of flows naturally into writing instructions for things that don't take 5 years to come to fruition.
Yes, that's great. Deb, over to you.
There we go. I've actually been designing for my entire life. I started studying fashion and design when I was in high school, and then I studied art in college. I only started knitting 13 years ago, but it was a natural transition to go from making changes in patterns that I wanted to design it a different way, to actually writing patterns and designing my own. I actually got started when I took a class with Josh Bennett and another class with Tin Can Knits at Vogue Knitting Live. One was in how to design a knitwear collection, which was more like drawing and sketching, which I loved because I hadn't done that in a very long time. And the other one was a hat design class. And I went home and designed a hat that I had worked on, and that was my first pattern in 2018.
That's fantastic. And Jessica.
Yeah, so I had done some knitting as a kid. I say I learned how to knit 3 different times because I'd pick it up and forget how to do it and have to relearn. But I wasn't a knitter with a capital K until my last year of college. I had met a friend who then I found out was an indie yarn dyer. Discovered all of the things about the knitting community that I had no idea existed. And so on my winter breaks, I tended to like focus on one thing that I really wanted to like work on for the winter breaks. So that last winter break, knitting was the thing. And so I learned how to knit cables. I thought it was going to be the hardest thing ever, and I fell in love. And fast forward about 6 months after I graduated, I was not loving, my degree's in architectural engineering. I wasn't loving the monotony and the same thing over and over again. I really needed some creativity. I was working in interior design, and suddenly my hours were cut back significantly. And so I started an Etsy shop. And so I was making things to sell and getting bored with that, same thing over and over again. But I felt like I didn't have enough creativity to be a designer. I didn't really have the space or the money to be a dyer. And so I thought I was just kind of stuck. And then 3 months later, suddenly I had a million design ideas, and I've been designing ever since.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm very much that way, that I I am not interested in knitting things for sale, because the thought of making the same thing over and over, and they aren't the things that I want to make anyway. And some people love it. I have a colleague at the think tank where I work who says she makes hats. She sells hats, big chunky hats, big pom-poms, super cute, sells them at all of the pop-up markets and things. It would make me insane. But getting an idea out there into the world and seeing what other people do with it is so exciting. Anyway, the next question that we have, and this is probably the most difficult questions that can be asked of designers, but this is the one that our audience wanted to know, is where do you get your inspiration? So to put that another way, where do the ideas come from? Where do they start? Do they start with a particular yarn? Do they start with a particular shape? Do they start with a complete vision? Do they start with a color? Do they start with a problem? Do they start with a word? Last night's panel, everybody said they start with the words, which was fascinating because I hadn't heard that for many of the other panels. So, Lori, where do your patterns
Yeah,
come
I'm not
from?
a word person, so I'm actually an engineer during my day job, so a lot of I'm much more into math and shapes and stuff like that. So um my designs are, my creative outlet, and so it's like, kind of like painting for me, except it's painting with yarn. I like shapes. I like playing with how different colors go together. I have a fairly substantial stash because I kind of need it so that when I get an idea, I can throw things at it, and if it doesn't work, I can swap it out with other things. So most of my shawl designs are, yeah, just kind of like a shape and color movement concept that I get in my head and I sketch out, and I like to see how they flow from one to another. I get a lot of, I really like mid-century modern, where you got these really clean lines, but it's still very functional. So that's where a lot of that comes from when I go for shawl designs. For when I do the garment designs, it's all about texture, because Tunisian crochet has a lot of fun textures that you really can't simulate elsewhere. So I get a stitch pattern, and I just really want to turn it into something cozy that I can wear for the few times where I want to wear something warm.
Coming from Canada, the idea of not ever wanting to wear something warm is a little foreign,
It,
but I love it.
it was 77 Fahrenheit, which is about 22 Celsius yesterday.
Closer to 24, 25. Yeah.
Okay.
72 is sort of room temperature. So
Not here.
72, my parents' house, the thermostats were all still in imperial, and 72 is about 22
Ah,
degrees Celsius. So I always have that bar in my head.
okay.
Beth, over to you. Where's your inspiration? Where do your designs come from?
It's a couple different things. It's everything, nothing. I think the biggest one is that I get this idea in my head, I wonder if I could make something that is this shape without seeing the increases. So that'll be the whole problem, and I'll swatch it, and then if it turns into a project, great. If it doesn't, also fine. Or I wonder if I could make this stitch pattern stiff instead of the flowy that it's supposed to be. Or I wonder if I could do XYZ. The other constraint that I put on myself is that I struggle with finishing large projects. Always have, probably always will, because once I've solved the problem, they fail. They stop being interesting. So most things have to be a skein or two, nothing more, or they take years and years and years. And I do have a sweater that took 2 years, but it's done. I love it. You'd all laugh, but it's bulky, but hey, still love it. And lately I've been working on a theme that actually does start with words, that would be a collection really based on, I wonder if I could make a set of dress ups for my kids that are not prescriptive, like no doctor's costumes, no costumes, just pieces. They play with all my old scarves, all my old clothes. They love it. And this is kind of winding its way into a very positive, affirming collection for kids' imagination.
I love that idea.
That's really cool.
That's really neat. Deb, over to you.
I actually really love this question because inspiration is not something I have a shortage of. My problem is more which of the things that I've been inspired to do can I actually make right now. I carry around books like this that have dot paper grid in them, and if I see something in nature or some kind of a food item, I jot it down or I write down the idea. A lot of my designs do start with words because of the encoded lace. I think the first couple were people that are close to me, and I'm working on a series of pies right now. But really, it could be anything. It could be a shape that I love. It could be colors. It could be just something I want to remember or a quote that I hear. And I have many, many of those little books filled with sketches and ideas, and no time to knit them all.
I think we all have that problem.
Yeah. There was the group
More
last
ideas
night
than time.
was talking about, wouldn't it be nice if the patterns could just actually make themselves once you got past that like creative itch of I have to figure out how to do the thing. Now I still have miles of yarn to knit. What am I going to do with that? I
I
think
probably
that
have like 50 lace patterns that I've done the graph for and haven't written the patterns for yet.
wow.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably just publish a book of lace patterns.
I mean, but whatever engages your brain and whatever works for you, right? I
Yeah.
love that there's that flexibility in this. Beth is asking what the encoded lace means, and you did say briefly that it's based on words.
Right.
Do you
So
want to explain that a little more?
I start with a cipher. Like I'll take the alphabet and I'll assign each number a letter. And then I take the word and I'll put a yarn over in the spot that corresponds to the number. And then I manipulate it. Like I'll add in the decreases and flip them around and make them symmetrical and make it more attractive than just blotting out the word. So I mean, nobody could read these, but I know where they started and where they came from, and it's a way to get really interesting and unique shapes that start from a place that's near to my heart.
That's so cool. It reminds me of, did anybody else do this when you were learning cursive writing in school, where you wrote your name and then you wrote the mirror image and then you drew that became like a bug or a whatever, but it became a shape to play with. And it reminds me very much of that kind of exercise where you start with a word. What you end up with doesn't necessarily resemble the word, but it is this place of starting off this seed. And Jessica, over to you and your inspiration.
Yeah, I actually also really love this question because there's been a very clear evolution of my designs, and it's been based on where my inspiration comes from. So starting off, I was really interested in challenging myself, the math, and playing with textures. But I realized that I was doing this around an inspiration of things that I love. So like my first patterns, there were some that were based on hearts. I've always loved hearts. And then also I'm a huge empath. And then I had designs that were based around dancing in the rain and remembering summer, and like always just loved the summer season. And so all this stuff, it started from a place of stitches, but there was this kind of background layer. And so then I began to embrace that more, where that was my inspiration. And so then I have the sense of belonging series of collections that were based on really this whole period of my life where I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And so I made a collection from my home state, Montana, a collection from where I live now, North Carolina, and a collection called On the Road, that just like when you feel like you don't belong anywhere. And so there's this really strong period of my designing where it's very clear that it was inspired by emotions and things that really are valuable and important to me. And so that's where, I've come to say it, really my designs are about the stories of living. It's the relatable emotions that we all feel and can relate to, and the struggle and the joy and all of those emotions. Now my designs are starting to come into the inspiration is, okay, what am I really going to actually want to wear? And I know this question is coming up as well, but so I'm starting to have more simple designs that are just cozy and relaxing. And that's more of my inspiration, but I'm still wanting to keep that background layer of those emotions and those stories behind it.
That's lovely. That's lovely. So the next question from our audience is, what are your favorite things to design? And are those, in fact, the same or different from your favorite things to make? Which I think is a really interesting question, because it can get at some of the pressure that designers can feel to make things that are saleable versus the things that maybe they would want to spend their time on. The things that feel approachable for other people versus the things that really tickle your own brain? Or do you just run with what tickles your brain and hope that somebody else finds it intriguing as well? So, Lori, over to you.
Yes. No.
Yes is a good answer.
No. I actually design only stuff that I want to make, because I figured if I don't want to make it, then there's a good chance my audience doesn't want to make it either. So I do have a variety of stuff, because there's some days when I want something really complicated and intricate and fun, and then there's days where I just want to sit in front of the TV and just go. So my designs do span the whole range, but it's always I mean, I'm not going to finish something I don't like. So I know me. I think when I was, a very new designer, I started off in 2017, and there were some ones that I got like halfway through it and I'm like, this is boring, but I have to finish it. And so after that is like, I don't want to brute force it. This is, my side hustle, not my full-time job. So if I am crafting, I want it to be enjoyable for me. So, and the things I really like, I like shawls, like I said, because they're fun. You can do all sorts of things. There's almost no rules to them. That, they just have to go around your neck eventually. So shapes can be anything, color play can be anything, because they just fit. Garments are fun in a different way because, as somebody who enjoys math, garments are one giant math puzzle, and getting everything to work across, 10 different sizes is, it's a challenge, but it's interesting. And I wear all the stuff I make, so I make stuff that I actually want to wear too. So it's like I want to be able to make, design stuff that I want to make and stuff that I want to wear. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Beth, over to you.
So no matter what it is, it needs to be a small project. We've kind of touched on that already. Because I do like solving the problem, whatever the problem is, and then I'm on to the next thing. I've kind of addressed that by starting to size most of my playable designs as just mini, midi, and maxi, with maxi being like adult size, that if you wanted to wear it, you could, and it could be a shawl or a garment or whatever. Mini being kid friendly, like made for a small wingspan, like maybe 3 feet, because again, toddlers. And I don't actually wear a ton of my own creations. My kids adopt most of them. They love them, and it's been a huge learning experience in that knits and crochet items specifically are not these like ultra precious, have to take care of them perfectly. They get snagged, they get played with, they get used, they get loved. And that's almost better than them being this like perfect item on a shelf. I mean, amigurumi is not my thing to crochet at all, but I got in my head 2 days before Christmas that this was what my best friend's baby needed for Christmas. Finished a whole little nativity. It was great. Within 2 minutes, the kid had the baby Jesus in his mouth. And it was like, you know what? He loves it. That's good.
Yep.
It's all acrylic, so it's safe. But the whole point is that if someone else is using it and loving it, I'm teaching myself to be happy about that, even if they're not treating it the way that knitters would treat a project.
Yep. That's very well put. Deb, over to you.
Intellectually, I really love the challenge of designing sweaters. I actually like grading. I like the challenge of the puzzle. For the encoded lace, I think shawls work really well. It's just easier to fit the lace charts into a shawl. I like to knit a whole range of things. What I decide to knit seems to depend on what brain space I have available. In the last few months, it's been mostly garter stitch. So I've been knitting a lot of Martina Baim's really mindless garter shawls and wraps. But I'll have, a complicated project going where I need to like shut the door and have complete silence because it's tricky and I need to follow a chart. And I usually have a pair of socks that I carry around. And I usually have 1 or 2 shawls and a sweater going.
And Jessica, over to you.
Yeah, so I've always designed what I enjoy making. I haven't always enjoyed wearing what I like making. So my aesthetic for my like wardrobe is more of a very basic minimalist. I'm like the person who wears gray everything all the time. And if it's just a dress and leggings, that's perfect. And so then add on top of that, moving to North Carolina where it's warmer, and then the pandemic and no reason to go out and to be wearing accessories. I really felt like a disconnect between, all right, I'm making these things, designing these things, and I'm not using them. And I didn't love that feeling. I started off with a lot of shawls because it's so fun to use that just as a palette and so many things you can explore. But I'm moving more towards garments because that's what I enjoy wearing. And so it's the really simple stockinette that I enjoy wearing that I used to hate knitting. Designing was my challenge space. It was meant to be creative and challenging. And so that was just boring and I'd fall asleep. Now I really credit it to starting the pattern design circle and coaching. That can be more of my challenge space where I have that need fulfilled. And so now my designing space can be more relaxing and basic, so that it aligns better with what I actually want to wear.
Do you want to take a moment and tell us what the pattern design circle is? Because I don't know if all of our audience will know.
Yeah, it's resource hub, community center, learning center for knit and crochet pattern designers to connect, build businesses that really feel authentic and do what you want to do while growing alongside other folks. So we cover all of the marketing and business and designing and have amazing guests every month and workshops and all of the things. It's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Maybe if you want to throw I'll say this to all of you, if you want to throw links to other things into the chat, then we can also put them on the YouTube post so that folks can find them from there. All right. So the next question is, how do you pick and decide on colors color combinations or single colors, whatever your designs use for your design. I think there are people in the audience, there's a lot of people, makers, who find color really intimidating. And there's other people who color just comes naturally, and color is the whole reason for making things in the first place. So where are you on that spectrum? Where do you get your energy from in that, and do you have tips and tricks that you rely on for color? So Laurie.
I guess I would start with, I have a very obvious palette. I tend to like blues, purples, reds, greens, and jewel tones, and it's kind of hard to combine them poorly. So I do tend to go towards the things that I like to wear, colors that, you know, if you go into your closet and you say, wow, I have, you know, these are the colors I gravitate towards, then it makes sense if you're making something you want to wear that you go towards those colors. I try sometimes to go outside of that realm, but it's usually, say, I would pair like an orange with a blue, and versus, you know, going completely away from the blues and stuff like that. Sometimes if I'm collaborating with a dyer, they have like a collection in mind and I don't really have a choice. But, you know, if it's a dyer doing it, they understand color way better than I do. So they probably know what they want. I guess like I would say most people, if you would go to your wardrobe for inspiration because you know what you like, you obviously are already gravitating towards it when you're picking it off the shelf at the store, and it's a good way to also make sure that what you're making works with your current wardrobe. Even if you just absolutely love this skein of yarn over here, if it doesn't match anything in your wardrobe, you're never going to wear that shawl.
Very, very, very true. Beth, over to you.
So my wardrobe is primarily black, sometimes gray and white, which I'm rocking today. But architect life is a lot of like, you just don't want to have to think about it. So black is not a great color of yarn to work with, especially for crochet where you want to see your stitches. So I gravitate towards like golds and yellows because that's been my favorite color since I was a kid, and you can wear it with black and gray and white and it's all right. But then I'm slowly expanding to what I'm calling either off-brand primaries or moody rainbow, depending on whether it's bright or dark. And I'm kind of having a lot of fun with that because, you know, my kids' favorite colors are not yellow. And in my whole refocus on designing for things that people will use, they would rather see a dark red or a bright orange or whatever other color is the favorite that day. And that's kind of been a fun challenge to just focus on what'll get used.
Yeah.
Kind of going with what Laurie said, that, you know, look at your wardrobe or look at who you're designing for.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great tip. Deb, how about you?
I went to art school. I studied painting. And then I went to theater school and studied costume design. So I've had so many classes in color theory that I'm just really comfortable. I'm one of those people who's very comfortable with manipulating color. When I'm designing, sometimes I start with a yarn, and I will often choose what would not be considered the traditional combination. I like a bold mix of color. Most of my designs tend to use brighter colors, not towards the fluorescent, but like bright and high intensity. Sometimes, like with my pumpkin pie shawl, the shawl was named Pumpkin, so the obvious choice was to make a pumpkin colored yarn. So occasionally it will be inspired by what the thing is that I'm actually knitting. But in general, my theory about color is that any color can go with any other color. It's just a matter of how you use it and what the scale is and the proportions.
Yep. And Jessica, for you.
Yes. So part of my disconnect with not wanting to wear anything I designed had to do with color. I love playing with bright, bold colors. I don't love wearing bright, bold colors. So a lot of my early designs were very symbolic. It had direct correlation to whatever the design was about, kind of like what Deb was talking about. Even this shawl that I'm wearing here is part of a collection that there's endurance, trust, patience, hope. Anyway, each of the colors had a direct correlation to the symbolism. And so endurance was this basic, simple, and so they're like grounding, solid colors. And actually, this is one of my favorite things to wear. It's actually colors I love. But now I'm really focusing more on colors that I enjoy wearing, which is those jewel tones, teal, which is what I'm working with now. I'm okay if I just knit with this for the rest of my life. But that's really how I approach color now.
Yep. Yeah, I think that idea of paying attention to what you already have and what you gravitate to is so key, and it comes as a surprise for some folks. I find personally, if I go to a yarn festival, the colors of yarn that I will buy will be determined partly by what I'm wearing that day. One time I've gone wearing purple, and it's partly because my Knitters Guild, our kind of brand color is purple. So I'm wearing the purple Knitters Guild shirt, and I will buy all the purple yarns and the things that go nicely with that particular bright purple. I've gone wearing like a bright green sweater, and lo and behold, I come home with a bag full of greens and golds and browns and the like tree colors. And it's so funny how you can just like lock in on a palette and like work with that and play with that, and it shapes what you're doing. Okay, so our final sort of planned question is what things are we going to see from you next? And Jessica, I assume that has something to do with the mystery object on your lap. And then we'll turn to the audience and see what questions they've got for us as well. So Lori, what's coming up next from you?
So this year's going to be a big year for Lori. I have a lot of garment designs that I have collabs with dyers, which is kind of nice because there's a lot of yarn that goes into garments, so having collabs helps a bit. I'm working on a Tunisian crochet quick start collection, so that for folks who haven't tried Tunisian crochet yet but want to, but don't want to be stuck in, dishcloth land, they have something fun to work on that they can, quickly improve their skills. And towards the end of the year, I'm actually coming out with a book on Tunisian crochet that basically goes into the more intermediate and advanced techniques. So I'm really excited about that. It's currently getting formatted at the publishers right now. So.
Ooh.
So yeah, look for a bunch of garments. If you're new to Tunisian, the quick start guide, and then at the end of the year, you can go beyond the beginning stuff.
That's exciting. Beth.
The first part of this year is taken up by some mystery designs, one of which is knit. Even I'm branching out because I found an edging that absolutely had to be an entire item. And that was a really fun problem to solve. And that's for inTANDEM, which I'm actually working on with Jessica. Later this year, there's a couple projects that are all a collaboration with one yarn dyer. And then getting towards the end of the year is when those dress up play items should start making an appearance.
That sounds like so much fun. Deb, how about you?
I am working on a series of half pie shawls based on flavors of pie. The next one's going to be key lime pie, and it will have a lace pattern based on key lime pie. I'm also contemplating publishing a book, like a collaboration with my late grandfather, he was a poet and he died when I was 5. So we've never really connected as adult artists. So I want to do a book where I have one of his poems and then I do a knitted pattern response to the poem. I think that would be something really fun to do.
Wow.
I just earned a certificate in sustainability from FIT, so you can expect designs featuring responsibly sourced yarns going forward.
That's fantastic. And Jessica.
So this year is looking very slow from the design front. I'm intentionally feeling like I need to slow down on designing to focus on podcasting and on pattern design circle and just being more intentional and aligned and not pushing forward because you feel like you have to push forward. So I have two designs coming up. The first is this that I am knitting on. It's the same thing that I'm wearing, but
Zoom doesn't want to show us.
Anyway, it's got herringbone band at the bottom of both the cuffs and the body, just a very basic pullover. And then my other design is also with inTANDEM, the knit and crochet zine that I'm working on with Beth and 12 other designers. And that's also a pullover. But otherwise, my challenge is to not design a whole bunch of new things this year. And so I'm other facets. I really want to focus more on that whole sense of connection through the stories of living, encouraging, motivating, inspiring other folks, and embracing more creativity outside of pattern designing. This is my first time in my life that I've gotten so focused on one kind of craft for several years, and so I'm really branching out into other forms of creativity as well. So
I love it. And Beth, thank you for throwing the link for inTANDEM in there. So now it is time to turn to our audience. So for the folks in the audience, if you have a question, you can use the raise your hand and then you can come on screen, or just unmute yourself. Or if you want to put your question in the chat, I can read it out, but please feel free to ask some questions. Amber always comes up with great questions and she's got her hand up. So Amber, over to you.
Hi. So my question today, for anyone who wants to answer, I'm curious if you could reflect a bit about your experience with the Fasten Off Yarnalong. Like, how does this differ from other spaces? What are your favorite things? Is there anything that you've encountered that is new to you and inspiring you to explore in your own designs? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amber. Do folks want to go around in the same circle, or does anybody really want to jump in on this? Lori, do you want to?
I guess I really appreciate the Fasten Off being off Ravelry. I'm one of the people who is affected by it negatively, the Ravelry redesign, and it's nice to have a community space that feels safe, and it's very inclusive, and I really just enjoy the camaraderie of, you know, a large make-along that, you know, the folks who run it do have more control over what's going on within the Discord and stuff like that. So
Awesome. Beth, how about you?
I also like the off Ravelry option. I can do some Ravelry, but if I'm on it for more than like 10 minutes, that's not good. You know, I can go on, grab a pattern, get off, but that's pretty much my limit. And just the whole, like your whole database of patterns, like that's remarkable. I've loved seeing what everyone else here is doing and having a reason to look at specific people and what they're designing and kind of get an overview of everybody. I mean, that's amazing.
Kathleen deserves huge applause. I think we can all agree for the database and the whole site and all of the tech in the background. So thank you, Kathleen. She is on the recording and she's saying "aw" in the chat. Deb, how about you?
I love the connection. I really only use Ravelry as a sales platform and a place to store my images. Honestly, I'm not on it for interactions. I also really appreciate the exposure of young and new designers through the Fasten Off Yarnalong. I know that I have had new customers who might not necessarily have known about me because of the Fasten Off Yarnalong. I struggle with Discord, so I don't make very much use of it. I get very easily overwhelmed and lost. So that would be the only thing that I have a hard time with.
Do you interact on Instagram or Twitter or elsewhere though? Yeah.
More Instagram lately because of the current leadership in Instagram. I'm mostly staying off of it.
On Twitter, yes.
Twitter, yes,
Yes.
Twitter. Sorry.
Yeah, I should say there's been a growing number also exploring on Mastodon as well, which is a whole other thing that a whole other piece of tech to wrap our heads around. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I appreciate about the Yarnalong is that it does happen in kind of a diffuse way. There is the central hub of the database, but there are various places that you can go and interact, and it doesn't have to be prescriptive that you must join this thing, you must use this piece of software, because for accessibility, that is not the definition of accessible. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I echo the same thing on the inclusivity. And to piggyback on what you were just saying about there being so many platforms, I think that makes it less overwhelming for me. This is my second year in the Fasten Off Yarnalong, both last year and this year. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to set aside the whole month of December and like really focus and be able to interact. And that has not happened at all. But I feel like I've still been able to participate even though I'm not on Discord. And I'm really, really loving the new events that you did this year on here with the panels and then the Ask Me Anythings. And it's just a really fun way to interact more and like really promoting lots of designers and like with all of the Instagram posts, highlighting different folks that nobody knows about and that, you know, are new to most of us. It just feels really amazing to me.
Yeah, it's so much fun, and it's lovely to find, you know, these panels, for example. We didn't set out and go, okay, we are going to find 4 brioche designers today, and then we're going to find 4 Tunisian designers a different day, but to find that there are common threads beyond the obvious yarn thread. There are common threads in every group you bring together, and the discussions are just really fantastic. It's a delight, and I gotta say, as I have been designing for a while, but I am not a prolific designer. My day job keeps me pretty busy, and I don't want it to become a side hustle that burns me out. But I get stuck in my own head sometimes, and I go like, my tech editor stopped tech editing. Now I'm never going to be able to publish another pattern again because I don't know any other tech editors. And it's just such a great event for connecting people and making these brands. People are sort of brands on Instagram and wherever, but really bringing them together as humans and building really human connections, which is just a lovely thing. So I appreciate that as well. Does anybody from the audience have any other questions? We are coming up on the hour mark, but we can keep going. We can wrap up. I'm just watching the I'm not ignoring you. I am watching over on the other monitor to see what's going on. I'm not seeing any other raised hands. But oh, Kathleen has a question. Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I tried to come up with sort of like a fast go around the circle question that could be kind of fun. And I want to know from each designer who has very obviously like a main craft that they focus on, if you sort of had unlimited time and interest, like what would be your very next sort of off your main craft that you would want to go and learn next?
I've always wanted to learn to weave, but that takes up a
Ooh.
lot of space.
Yep, it does. Beth, how about you?
I would love to experiment with building full-scale playhouses, like treehouse gourmet things. Completely
Ooh,
unrelated to yarn, but I think that would be so fun. And then you could like decorate in yarn.
speaking of things that take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Deb, how about you?
I'm actually really interested in needle punch. I saw a YouTube video. There's this artist called Curry Goat, and he does these massively large rugs that they're basically based on tattoo designs, and that wouldn't be my world, but I would love to literally be able to paint with yarn on a giant canvas and a punch needle gun. It just looks really satisfying.
They do look like a lot of fun. Jessica, how about you?
I love the idea of learning to spin. I would love to get back into sewing. That was kind of what I did as a kid. But my answer is the same as Lori. Weaving is the thing. But for me, I'm more interested in smaller wall art. And so I actually have I've bought a kit for circular wall art weaving that I'm hopefully going to get to this week. So that's
Fun. Fun. All right, I have one last question, unless anyone in the audience wants to go. And that is, what barriers do you see for designers, and what challenges are there to somebody either as a new designer or an established designer, and what are your thoughts on ways to work around that? So I mean, the whole Fasten Off Yarnalong came around because of the change to Ravelry, and the need to address that and come up with an inclusive way of doing that. But we also, we've had designers who are really focused on size inclusive. We've had designers who are really focused on making patterns that work for screen readers, for example. Jessica, I think I know where you're going to go, and it's the building of the community and learning all of the skills and the marketing stuff. But what are the hurdles that you face, and do you have tips and tricks for others who are in this world or considering being in this world? Lori, I to keep putting you on the spot first.
I mean, I guess like being able to afford to be a designer at the beginning is not cheap. You have to spend a good amount of your time working on it, where you could be working on other things. You have to spend, you're not going to have yarn support at the beginning. You're not going to have a tech editor paid for. So I totally think that that's probably one of the bigger things that a lot of, new designers, they don't understand how much, or, it costs a fair amount to get into it. So I don't know if there's a really great way to get around that. There are various like platforms that are good about supporting newer designers, places like We Crochet and Knit Picks. When they do calls for submissions, a lot of times they'll take some newer designers, and those do include, the yarn support and the tech editing and stuff. So, that just try and look around for places that are welcoming to new designers, and, see if learning like how to write a pattern is not easy, and places like that also give you a format, and then they tech edit to that format so you can start getting an idea of what needs to be included and what doesn't need to be included in the design.
Yep, agreed. I would say Jessica says she has a pushback to share on the yarn support if you're not getting yarn support if you're a new designer. But yeah, that the learning to write a pattern thing. Kate Atherley has a great book, which I found really useful. But I'd say another good resource for sort of learning to write is going to publications like Knitty, for example, has a really thorough style guide. It's just a Word document that you can literally start writing your pattern into, but it makes sure that you've covered all of the bases. Have you covered the gauge, the final measurements, the yarn and the reasons for the yarn choices? Have you covered the sizing and all of those pieces? And I think those are really useful tools. Beth, how about you?
I think there's an idea among especially newer designers, at least I had it when I started, that if you design it, they will come. That's not the case. There are so many other skills you need to learn and develop. You need to market yourself. People are usually pretty shy about that. You need to photograph it. You need to present it well. You need to actually write a pattern, which again is a learning curve. And it's not just can you design, it's can you design and learn to present yourself in a way that is real and authentic and not just like this annoying salesy, like buy my pattern 20,000 times.
Yep.
Or staying silent because you're afraid that no one will listen.
Also that I feel you. Deb, how about you?
I think that there are a lot of barriers and struggles. I agree with what Lori and Beth have already said. I'm also going to add respect for the business as a knitting designer. I think there's not everyone has it, but there is a lot of expectation that there will be free patterns available. And I think that in general, all of the patterns that are available for sale are underpriced. And I think that our work as designers is undervalued. So you have to sell so many patterns in order to make a profit on a design that, like, even though we're already writing patterns and making samples and hiring a tech editor and doing the photography and doing the marketing, most of us will also have to find another way to generate revenue if we want to make this knitting design thing our full-time business, whether it's podcasting or I sell, I have a print on demand business on Etsy where I do knitting themed t-shirts and Christmas ornaments. And that has actually been more profitable than my pattern sales. And in some ways, I think Ravelry is a bit of the problem because of the hot right now. And, you know, there are some designers that as soon as they drop a pattern, thousands of people run to buy it. And then us newer designers get buried on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 20th page of the hot right now. So
Yep.
I could go on for days, but I think that's enough.
Kathleen is agreeing in the chat. She says, totally agree. In this industry, if you build it, then you've built it. People won't necessarily come, which is a key realization. Jessica, how about you?
I'm with Deb. As soon as you asked the question, I'm like, do you want to have like a 3-day conversation?
Welcome to my TED Talk.
Sweater designing, I think there's a lot of barriers, a lot of information that folks aren't willing to share even for a price, especially when it comes to inclusive garments. But then the main one that I was thinking of was also paying designers. It requires a lot of privilege to be able to do this. And it's, you know, we've already heard so many times on this call alone, folks talking about, oh, it's my side hustle and it doesn't need to do this, it doesn't need to do that, it's my side hustle. And that's great and wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But at the same time, for the folks that are trying to do it as a full-time business, it's very, 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 very difficult to make a full-time income, especially in the first couple of years. And so many conversations we could go into with pattern pricing and valuing our work and so many other veins there. And even, you brought up the, marketing, all of that, just investing in education to know how to run a business and how to market and so many things that are barriers financially and from a privilege standpoint.
I think that sums it up really nicely. And I love that, we started off going, well, how did you get into designing? And it was all because I make things and I want to solve a problem with the things that I am making. And I see this gap in the patterns, so I need to fill the gap with my patterns, to come sort of all the way around to now, how do I turn this into something that can even just sustain itself, like even just pay for itself, let alone feed me and my dog and all of those other pieces. So thank you all so much for this. We are fully past the hour now. So I think this is a great place to wrap up. Thank you all so much for being part of the Fasten Off Yarnalong. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. It's been fantastic. I will stop the recording now. We will get this recording up on YouTube as soon as we can. But there's no need to sign off. If anybody wants to hang out and continue chatting, we can totally do that.
Thank you so much for hosting this.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.